Hey everyone, welcome back, and I am finally making another video about poetry. You guys have been asking for so long, and I'm finally doing it. Today we are going to be reviewing a poetry collection called Alterlife by Milo Prather, who you may know from his first novel, Age of Scorpius, which was published under the pen names Milo Winter and Audra Winter. Age of Scorpius, oh, there's a lot of drama around it, and I was going to make a video a while back, but I kind of just more and more like TikTok videos kept coming out and there was a lot of stuff going on and I kind of got a little bit confused myself and I never even got around to reading the book. But what I do know is there were a lot of negative reviews about it, and we're kind of going to be touching on it in the last section of this video where I kind of talk about how it ties into this poetry collection. This poetry collection, though, Alterlife, it's only just come out in the last couple of weeks. I think it was just before Christmas it was released, and I have a lot of thoughts about it. Is it the worst poetry collection I've ever read? No, not at all. Does he show promise in a couple of places? Yes, absolutely. Would I recommend you go buy this book and spend your time and money on it? Probably not, no. The biggest problem with this collection is that it's simply just not ready to be published. Milo still hasn't found his voice yet as a writer, and I think that's very, very clear in this collection. It feels like he's mimicking what he thinks a poet should sound like rather than what he sounds like. So I'm hearing him trying to mimic the voice of others. I'm not hearing his voice. And so because of that, a lot of his writing often comes across as pretentious but confused. There's nothing that feels authentic about this collection, and that's my biggest criticism of it, the lack of authenticity. The writing itself, from an objective level, if we're talking about like grammar and syntax and so on, is just not very good. There were so many moments when I was reading and I was asking myself, like, what does this even mean? Like, what is he trying to say? And I genuinely thought this was an issue with me, because a lot of you know with my health issues and stuff, I've been having a lot of brain fog and memory issues over the last year, and I thought maybe this is a me problem. Maybe I'm just not getting this. So I ended up giving it to Alex and being like, can you read this? Can you tell me what you think? And even he was like, what is he even trying to say? This doesn't make any sense. He's not using these words correctly. And it's like, oh, thank God it's not just me. He backed me up as well. In the author's note at the end of the book, this one line in particular really stood out to me. I've decided to publish my poetry at the foot of my creative gravestone, my answer to the artist's wrath that I found walking through a cemetery in Oslo at midnight in the snowy Nordic valley I'm in right now. What is he even trying to say there? I mean, I kind of get it to some degree, right? I think the at the foot of my creative gravestone bit is in regards to him being cancelled online and his first novel heavily critiqued and getting a lot of bad reviews, right? I think that's what that refers to. But the rest of it, I mean, there's some literal bits, like, you know, he was in Oslo when he wrote some of this. Okay, but what the hell does my answer to the artist's wrath I found walking through a cemetery even mean? It sounds like pretentious nonsense with no substance. It just bothers me a bit. And this is a theme that we're going to be looking at and noticing throughout the poems, which we're going to be looking at in detail in a moment. I'm going to do my kind of typical poetry format where I read you the poems from his collection, I give you my opinions on them, we try and figure out what he was trying to say, we look at what's good about it, what's bad about it, and then we compare it to another piece of work that did that, but maybe a little bit better or in a different way. But first, yeah, there's a couple more things I want to mention as like an overall critique of the book. A lot of his word choices do not sound natural. More like he opened a thesaurus and just picked out big words rather than ones that are naturally in his vocabulary. And again, this is why it doesn't feel authentic. He didn't pick words that necessarily work with the poem's rhythm or rhyme or tone or voice. I genuinely want to know if these are words he uses in his everyday life, because if he is, he's probably using them wrong in the same way he does in these poems. But the issue isn't just with the contents of the book, but in how it's made and put together. So I ordered the paperback from Amazon for like £11 whatever, and it's full of really unprofessional printing and formatting errors. So for example, he's not created the document at the right size, and so his bleed edges are off, which means a lot of pages have a really awkward white border around them when they should be printed to the edge. This is something that you need to get right on a basic level before you even create your document. You know, when you're setting it up in InDesign or Word or whatever it is you're using to make your book, you set your page size, and then you have your margins, you have your bleed edges and so on like that, and you need to get it the right size, otherwise it's not going to print correctly. He hasn't done that, so it's not printed correctly. And I get it, printing is hard, formatting is hard, but this is a basic part of self-publishing that you need to get right, otherwise your book just looks unprofessional and unfinished. And I don't understand why he would have seen this when he got his proofs through and he didn't correct it. I don't understand why it's not been corrected. This is a very, very obvious thing that is quite an easy fix. I kind of worry that because of this, he's not actually that passionate about this book, and it was just meant to be like a quick and easy cash grab for him or something. The other thing to discuss about this book is the artwork, and I've seen a lot of people saying that they think the artwork is fantastic and brilliant and the best thing about the book, and I kind of have a slightly different perspective, which some of you may disagree with, and that's absolutely fine. This artwork was done by someone called Sorli Ralhalla, and it seems to be marketed as a big selling point of the book. But the problem is I just kind of don't find the artwork good enough as a whole. And again, there are issues here with formatting as well. So many of these images are not of a high enough resolution to be printed at this size, and so they look low quality on the paper, and they look kind of blurry or pixelated, you might say. They just don't look good. Again, I might be a little picky about this and fussy about this because a lot of you may know I used to work in a printing lab. It was a photography lab. We did a lot of printing. We did art prints and stuff like that. So these are the things that I notice. And to me, this was a really, really basic thing that just screams unprofessional and amateur and not good. It detracts from the contents of the book for me because all I see are these printing errors, you know? But as for the artwork itself, it is a mixed bag. Some is good, some I just don't really like at all. I think there's some pages that it's really unclear what is actually trying to be drawn. In others, I think overall it lacks cohesion throughout the book. There are too many different styles competing from page to page. Sometimes even on one double page spread, you're like, why are these next to each other? These look completely out of place. What I would have liked to see with this book is the artwork really flowing from one page to the next and having a cohesive style or theme, or maybe even colour scheme if you want to experiment with different styles, or even just reusing similar elements throughout. I've criticised the artwork in collections like Lily Reinhardt? People keep saying I say her name wrong and I don't know how to say it anymore. In her collection, Swimming Lessons, I criticised the artwork in there for being like kind of basic and boring, but at least it was cohesive throughout the whole collection. You don't have that in this. Even though the artwork was done all by the same artist, it looked like it was done by several different amateur artists who didn't speak to each other throughout and all had very different briefs, and then it was all thrown together at the last minute, except it wasn't. It was all the same person, so I'm left really confused. That said, there were a few good individual pieces from page to page. The opening spread of the Phoenix is quite cool. The background to Arctic Circle of Fire is quite cool. But those few good pieces were let down by the overall lack of cohesion and by other really weak pieces that just kind of felt, I could have kind of done without this, you know? Back to the book overall though and the contents poetry-wise, and one criticism I saw of this book on Goodreads was a person complaining that there weren't enough poems for the price tag, but this is a criticism that I do really disagree with, because for me, when you're buying a poetry collection, you're not necessarily paying for quantity but quality. I would rather spend 10, 20, 30 pounds on a really, really good short collection than, you know, a fiver on a 100 poem long collection that's absolute rubbish, you know? For me, I actually think there were too many poems in this book because there were so many that were just mediocre, and I wish he'd focused on making the good ones great and so had less really, really good poems than more mediocre poems. Does that make sense? None of them in particular really stood out as being like, yes, wow, great, this is sticking in my mind, you know? A lot of them were mediocre and forgetful, and even the ones that had a couple of good lines in here and there, I was a bit like, it's kind of let down by the rest of it, you know? A lot of the poems as well covered really similar ideas or events or have similar themes or images, and I wish that they'd been combined and reworked and refined into one really good poem. And I'm not saying you can't write different poems about the same topic or whatever, but I am saying it's better to have one really, really good poem about something than 3 mediocre ones about it. And if you are going to include multiple poems about the same thing in one collection, then I want them to be distinct from each other. Maybe you're doing different formats or styles or writing in different voices or from a different perspective, or, you know, just looking at it in a different way. I want them to be really distinct, and that's not what's happening in this collection. So, with that in mind, let's look at some specific poems. First up, we have Scarification. I am but a fleck of my becoming, layers too serried to crawl from carapace before my legacy scar my skin, for I cannot grow without your abrasion. Trust me, please, I must be split open before I can prove my heights. And then there's a little drawing of a tree, or some trees. A forest scene, if you will. Because it is. I'm sure the lack of punctuation here is a choice, but coupled with some of the questionable word choices and odd syntax, it just sort of makes it really impossible to read. I don't quite know how he wants it to be read. I think the first 2 lines alone tells a lot about this poet's writing style. I am but a fleck of my becoming. Again, it sounds like someone trying to mimic what they think a poet sounds like, but in reality it doesn't really do much. It doesn't really tell as much. It doesn't really help the poem along. It's not good syntax, it's not useful syntax, it's just awkward. Like, okay, so the meaning of this is you're just a little part of who you could be, you have potential, but you're not there yet. I get it, it's an interesting sentiment, but on its own, when you express it in this way, it's just a bit dull, isn't it? Where's the vivid imagery? Where's the deeper meaning? Where's the layers? Or if you don't want to do that, then make a stylistic choice to be forward, to be direct, to say, hey, I'm unfinished. I have potential, but I'm not there. You don't need to try and make it sound poetic when there's nothing poetic about how you're writing. Yeah, see, in my original notes I wrote there are lines trying to sound deep, but without actually doing anything to warrant that. There's a similar thing with the next lines, but they sound even more awkward. Layers too serried to crawl from carapace. It doesn't sound Actually, I don't even know how you pronounce carapace. It's a word I've only ever read. Sorry, so if I'm pronouncing that wrong, please tell me. Yeah, it doesn't sound natural. I don't believe these are words, like serried and carapace, that the poet genuinely uses regularly, and I'm not sure they're even the best ones to express himself in this situation. For one thing, I can't help but feel like it should be from the carapace, or from a carapace. You could even do his carapace, your carapace, anything like that. Because 1, it would make more grammatical sense. 2, it would create a better rhythm and make the poem flow and sound better. And 3, it provides some context here that's kind of missing and it would make it more interesting, you know? Whose shell with its super close layers is keeping you trapped? Is it your own or someone else's? Are you telling me that you are feeling a need to protect yourself to such an extent that it's stopping you from growing? Or is someone else being overprotective? The use of a pronoun here would tell us a lot. This is followed by perhaps the most confusing lines in this poem, right? Before my legacy, scar my skin. So does he mean before my legacy, comma, scar my skin? As in, I'm standing before whatever my legacy is, or it's the time period before I create my legacy and I need my skin scarring to get there? Or does he mean before my legacy scars? With an S, there should be my skin. As in, his legacy is going to scar his skin, and I can't move until this happens. And he's going to be remembered for something that has hurt him, but changed him for the, hopefully the better? I don't know. This is where the lack of punctuation becomes a problem. Because it's not that it's like purposely ambiguous and intriguing, it's just confusing. It's not, ooh, there's layers of meaning to this and different interpretations. It's, wait, are these typos or errors that he's just missed? I don't know. And then at the very end, we've got some more awkward lines in between about how he needs pain to grow. Again, this would be a really interesting concept to explore in a poem, but it's just done in such a simplistic way that it's just lacking overall, you know? And then, despite how simplistic it is, the poet decides to end the poem by summarizing what we've just read. Like, he says, trust me, please, I must be split open before I can prove my heights. We know! That's what the rest of the poem was about. You just told us you don't need to put a TLDR at the end of your poem. Very odd, very odd. It adds nothing. I've often said in my videos that a lot of the best poems get very specific in order for us to feel emotions that are universal. A great example of this comes from Gourmet's poem Second Estrangement. It's a poem about feeling lost, maybe in life, maybe you don't quite know where you're going, maybe you feel quite lonely, maybe you feel small, but in order to explain that feeling in the broader sense, she gives a very specific example of how in your life you can feel like a little kid lost in a public space. So this is Second Estrangement. Please raise your hand. Whomever else of you has been a child, lost in a market or a mall, without knowing it at first, following a stranger accidentally thinking he is yours, your family or your parent, even grabbing for his hand, even calling the word you said then for father, only to see the face look strangely down, utterly foreign, utterly not the one who loves you. You who are a bird suddenly stunned by the glass partitions of rooms. How far the world you knew, and tall and filled, finally, with strangers. So this is so much more impactful than if she'd just said, please raise your hand if you've ever felt lost and alone. You know, the way that Milo would write it. The way that Milo basically wrote it in his poem. The way she writes, though, you feel the helplessness, you feel the confusion, you feel like a little lost child yourself. Eventually, with that image of the bird, you feel a little pain and shock. You don't get anything like that in Milo's poem, unfortunately. You're told what he's feeling, you're told these events, but you don't feel anything with him. You're not made to feel any of the emotions. And this concept of being specific to depict a universal emotion is something that I personally have tried to put into my own writing, so I'm just very much an amateur poet, not anything special. And my level of success in whether I've managed to use specific examples to portray emotions, that's down to you. You guys can tell me if I've been successful or not. But one particular poem that I did it in is one of my favourites I've ever written, and it's in my second book, Outside, and it's called Wings. And it's a very, very, very loose retelling of the Icarus myth, but it's about my own life and my mum. And like Milo's poem, it has the same theme of being about how pain and failure are necessary for growth, but we took very different approaches to it, I think. So if you don't mind, I'll read you Wings. And, you know, this is not a perfect poem. I'm still very much a work in progress, but I think I just want to kind of pop it in here to show you how you can have different approaches to the same kind of subject, you know? My mother was scared to watch her child grow up. One time she caught me with piles of paper, PVA, and a pot of feathers pilfered from Penistone pigeons and washed in that sad sage bathroom sink. I used imperial leather soap worn down to the size of a penny and just an icy trickle from the broken tap to scrub the mud from the dull grey veins, laid each with care and rationed the glue as she shook her head sadly, took a pair of scissors from behind her teeth and told me I was fated to fall, destined to stall, and when I did I shouldn't call out for help or beg for her. Better to keep my lowly head bowed down, better to keep my feet firmly bolted to the ground. My mother was scared to break the class's cast. I placed the paper, now confetti, aside and tried wood instead. Sawing each beam with care and sanding each splinter away, I held my breath, carving every stroke, carefully shaping my resolution, never shaking, intertwining strands of birch, pine, oak, and fir, strong enough to never bend, break, fold, or tear. She watched me with a lighter in her hand. A flick and a click, and the soft flame danced as she told me tales of the evil sun, hotter than 1,000 flames. And begging to burn and blister my soft skin, she told me flying was a sin. Better to remain on the land you're born in. Stay content with your lot in life. Stay put through pain, poverty, and strife. My mother was scared to ever even try. Finally, I found what she couldn't pierce, and worked deep into the night. By torchlight, I welded wings of solid steel, sturdy but cold, the shears slipped right off. I set out to soar the silver skies and feel the sun's soft kiss, and at first I flew high and fast and got my every wish. But soon the steel weighed me down, an ache spread through my limbs, my back cracked, my shoulders sagged, and quickly I was dragged into the ocean waiting below with open arms and mouth. With pressure building in my ears, my mother's words grew loud. "You've fluffed your flight," she scolded, like she was almost proud of herself. My mother was scared to see anyone fall, and how I fell. But what my mother never knew is that we should not fear the fall, for falling is a part of flying, and failing doesn't lead to dying, and breaking is the path to growing, and living means always knowing that we will rise again. So, with raging fire in my lungs, I spat and spun and screamed. The heat began to spread until I felt clean. My lips and lungs began to blister, then each cell grew anew. My flesh grew stronger, new wings grew longer, budding from my healing back, shedding the shackles of my past, and my mother's words of warning were the only things left falling from my mind as I burst through the ocean's surface and found a brand new life and purpose. It's a little bit of a long one, but a very different approach. Basically, I start as a small child, trying to build myself some wings to fly away, but my mum's scared, so she destroys them. And as time goes on, I keep coming back and making stronger wings of stronger material, and each time she burns it or destroys it in some way until I finally create something out of steel, strong enough that she can't burn it, she can't cut it, she can't do anything to it. But with these big, strong, heavy defenses now that she can't get through, I try and fly away, but it's too heavy and I nearly drown. Except it turns out that instead of drowning, I go through this kind of metamorphosis and end up naturally growing wings of my own that allow me to flourish and fly away and have a good life. So yeah, similar theme to Milo's poem, but a very different approach. Let's move on quickly to another one, and let's take a look at Eat My Young. Destruction I crave, these wounds are infectious. I feast on naivety and lick the blood off its bones. Must I remove this sanguinity to survive? I'm obsessed with restarting, frailty and fortress, a disemboweled wraith with its limbs in the clutch of canines. I've been raised to compete in my own ring. Death matches are in my nature. I'm ready for new brood, to tear heart from chest, devour my spirit, for he is my runt. So let's start with trying to summarize what he's saying in this poem, because I don't think it necessarily has a clear message in itself, but let's try and figure it out if we can. I feel like it's a little jumbled at times. Basically, he's saying, I want more destruction and I can't help it, so I hurt those who are naive. Do I need to keep destroying people's happiness to survive? Once I've hurt someone, I go back and befriend other people to hurt them again. Whether they're weak or have defenses, I attack. I can't help it, I was just raised this way. I've just finished hurting some people, I'm ready to move on to hurt some others, but I'm also weak, so people will also hurt me, and I'll hurt me too, or something like that. Like, I'm weak, so I hurt myself, I can't help it. I always hurt people who are weak, and I'm weak. Something like that. The poet did add a warning for self-harm on this poem, so I think he's trying to focus on the hurting yourself bit, but yeah, I think overall it's meant to be a poem about how he keeps hurting himself and his inner child because he just can't help it. I don't know. It just doesn't work for me. I actually wish he kind of leaned into the I'm actually the monster hurting people narrative, and he could have, like, you know, written from the perspective of that kind of character. But instead he chose to go with the, like, I'm just a naive baby and I keep hurting myself, I'm not allowed to be happy thing. And it felt a little self-pitying and didn't really do much for me. Don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely fine with poems about self-harm and examining that as someone who has struggled with that in the past, and still has urges to this day. It's something that I've written about myself and that I commend other people for writing about, and I don't think I'm never going to critique that as a subject matter. I'm never going to critique someone's feelings and experiences. I just don't think on a technical level this poem is good enough or does that subject matter justice, you know? So let's take a look at why. So firstly, one of the things, like, he has as a selling point about this book is that it's meant to be full of, like, natural imagery, lots of nature stuff, there's a big connection with nature, blah blah. I wish this poem had utilised that a little bit more. Maybe we could have some comparisons to other animals who are known for eating their young and cannibalism and so on. So for example, compare yourself or this character or whoever you're talking about to black lace weaver spiders whose young eat their mother, versus sharks who eat their siblings in the womb, versus hamsters or rabbits who eat their young sometimes due to stress or dealing with food scarcity or other issues. And so, you know, you could have these comparisons between different types of cannibalism and how, you know, draw comparisons between people and humans and things that have happened in your life, and that could be interesting. Oh, by the way, if you want to find out more about cannibalism in animals and nature, it's actually really interesting. There's a really good book called Eat Me, A Natural and Unnatural History of Cannibalism by Bill Schutt, and it's fantastic. I really recommend it. With this in mind, I don't hate the choice to use wolves as his main subject matter in this poem. Wolves have been known to eat weakened or injured pack members or pups if, for example, it's a particularly harsh winter or if they're struggling to find other food. So I get it. It's like an eat your weakest link sort of thing. But I do think he could have leaned into this imagery a lot more. Because as it stands, there's not really much there, is there? The artwork is about wolves, or the artwork shows wolves, which is fine. But again, this is one of the examples of a piece of art that's too low resolution and it just looks poor printed. And then he's got the lines like licking the blood from its bones, saying he has canine teeth to imply, you know, some sort of meat-eating mammal, maybe a wolf, I don't know. What else is there? That's about it, isn't there? Yeah, nothing else really says wolf in that poem. So I do feel like he could have done more. I wish he'd got more specific. I wish we'd had more actual natural imagery in there. I also feel like he's relied too much on cliches in this poem and stuff that's just been overdone. Feasting on naivety, licking blood from its bones, wounds are infectious. It's all been done before, and this poem doesn't really do it in a new or inventive way. It doesn't add anything new to that stuff. I would have liked him to get more specific and be more clear about what the message of this poem was. There's some really clunky syntax throughout, which has the same problem as the last one we just read. He's trying to sound poetic, but at the detriment of clarity, rhythm, and, making sense. And, grammatically correct syntax. Look at the opening lines, right? Destruction I crave is not natural, but it's not been changed up for any good reason. Naturally, you would say I crave destruction, right? Why switch it up and flip it around if you're not gonna have a purpose for it? There's no rhyme or rhythm there that he's trying to stick to. He's just done it to sound poetic, right? Sometimes you do want to change up the syntax for the sake of sticking to a certain rhythm or making a rhyme scheme work, but there's none of that here and it just sounds awkward. A good example of that done well, though, is in Christina Rossetti's poem, I Wish I Could Remember That First Day, which is absolutely lovely. I wish I could remember that first day, first hour, first moment of your meeting me. If bright or dim the season, it might be summer or winter for all I can say. So unrecorded did it slip away, so blind was I to see and to foresee, so dull to mark the budding of my tree, that would not blossom yet for many a May. If only I could recollect it, such a day of days, I let it come and go, as traceless as a thaw of bygone snow. It seemed to mean so little, meant so much. If only now I could recall that touch, first touch of hand in hand, did one but know. I feel like I read that poorly, I'm so sorry. But as you read it and hear it, you'll notice there's a lot of lines which don't exactly sound natural syntax-wise, right? So you wouldn't say, so unrecorded did it slip away in real life, would you? You'd say, oh, it slipped away unrecorded, right? But Christina is writing a sonnet here in iambic pentameter. That means it's a 14-line poem. Each line has 10 syllables with 5 little da-dum sounds. So da-dum, 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 da-dum. So unrecorded did it slip away. She also has her rhyme scheme in here that she's sticking to. So in this case, having unusual syntax is appropriate because she's creating meaning not just through her words, but in her rhyme and rhythm and wanting to emphasize certain words and sounds in her poem. So unrecorded did it slip away. You've got an emphasis there on slip way. You're really getting that punchiness to it and it creates this little flow. Milo doesn't have this excuse. He's not using any particular rhythm or rhyme. His unusual syntax doesn't really emphasize any particular words. It just sounds clunky. Again, it's like he's seen other poets do this unusual syntax and thinks, oh, I'll copy it too, but he doesn't understand why they did it and what it brought to the poem. So it's that lack of knowledge where he's implementing these things but not knowing why he's doing it, and that's why it doesn't work. Following on from this, I noticed a lot of odd clusters of words which don't really go together or make grammatical sense in this poem. So I really don't understand this line. I'm obsessed with restarting, frailty, and fortress. You've got a present participle verb and then 2 nouns, one abstract, one concrete, right? Put any other words in here and you'll see how little it makes sense. I'm obsessed with swimming, honesty, and house. It doesn't make sense. It's, for me, the fortress at the end which really throws it all off. I get with fortress, you probably want to use that word to create an image of defensiveness, right? That's fair enough. So you have this juxtaposition of frailty and strength, frailty and defense. I get that, but it just doesn't work with the words he's chosen. And I also don't get what it has to do with restarting either. If he described something as a frail fortress, that would have been really cool. But being obsessed with frailty and fortress doesn't make sense. You could say I'm obsessed with frailty and defensiveness. You could say I'm obsessed with a frail fortress. But as it is, I just don't know what he's trying to say. I don't understand. This is by far the worst, most confused stanza in this poem. It's very odd. Because then it goes on to say, a disemboweled wraith with its limbs in the clutch of canines. Which again kind of confuses me because we had this wolf imagery and now suddenly we've got wraith imagery. And when I think of wraiths, I don't think about them having bowels or limbs at all. So how it could be disemboweled with its limbs in the mouth of a wolf, I don't understand. That's an image that just doesn't work in my mind. Wraiths are by definition sort of insubstantial, sort of entirely immaterial. So to say it has the limbs and the teeth of a wolf and it's been disemboweled feels odd, and not in a purposely uncomfortable way, just in a this is really muddled and doesn't make any sense kind of way. And again, having wraith imagery just randomly in here when you've had all this wolf imagery, I don't understand where it's come from. It doesn't make sense. It feels out of place. I would prefer if he'd stuck with the animal imagery in, you know, like the real world. So have like a wolf cub, like a weak wolf cub, or some other animal that wolves kill, or I don't know, anything. Hey, excuse me recording this outside on a busy street, but I was just in the co-working space and I realised that I am pretty sure I've completely like misread this line. I'm editing and I'm like, I think he was going for something entirely different and I've just completely misread it because again, the grammar's so poor. So I think what he meant is, blah blah blah, restarting, full stop, new sentence, frailty and fortress, and then he goes on to his wraith line, and the wraith is meant to be the frailty, the teeth are the fortress, but because that grammar's not there, it doesn't make sense, so it's hard to read, it's still bad, and I don't get what restarting has to do with a wraith being eaten. It's bad, just bad in a different way to what I thought it was. I'm very confused. And then the next stanza talking about being in the ring and death matches, which are like what, boxing terms? I don't know. I'm not into fighting. Wrestling maybe? I don't know. It's some human sport anyway, right? You wouldn't hear those words normally in the context of either wolves or wraiths. So it really takes you out of the poem and it doesn't make sense. It feels completely out of place. It's really jarring. There's nothing connecting these stanzas. There's no there's some other basic grammar errors too, like in the last stanza, I am ready for new brood to tear heart from chest, devour my spirit for he is my runt. Do you mean a new brood? Like, I am ready for a new brood? Because just brood alone makes no sense. Or are you ready to brood? I don't know what you're trying to say here. This is the same issue as Carapace in the first poem we looked at. I don't know. I don't mind the to tear heart from chest line because it leaves it a little bit ambiguous. This is fine. Are you eating them? Are they eating you? Are you doing it as a team? I don't know. I think it works. I just think the theme of cannibalism and eating your young or eating weakened members of your pack, or even eating yourself, is something that could be so powerful if it's done really well. I just feel like it hasn't been understood or developed enough in this poem. For a more direct comparison, and something that seems basic on the surface, but it's actually really, really well done, listen to this absolute genius piece by Warsan Shire. It's called Filial Cannibalism. From time to time, mothers in the wild devour their young, an appetite born of pure, bright need. Occasionally, mothers from ordinary homes, much like our own, feed on the viscid shame their daughters are forced to secrete from the glands formed in the favour of men. Sorry if you can hear Kubi having a little cry outside, bless her. She uses this idea of cannibalism being born from necessity and a survival instinct to explore the relationship between mothers and daughters raised in a patriarchal society where women are inherently taught to feel shame. And she gets you question how much of that is based on survival instinct and necessity. How much are we taught to feel shame and make ourselves small and modest to protect ourselves, to survive, when in this world men are the predators essentially. It's so simple on the surface, but it gives you so much to think about because it's got these layers to it and it's absolutely fascinating. Okay, day 2 of filming, and let's see how far we can get with this today. Our next poem that we're going to look at is called Lean Into, and this displays all of the same problems that we're speaking about in that last part. So this is a prose poem, so let me just read this to you. It is easier to fall into heartbreak's stiff arms, gentle now. Close your eyes and let the pain take you in waves. Your strongest days are yet to come. Resistance is the enemy of growth, for our greatest creation arrives in the wake of our destruction. The dance of your fire burns hotter each time it flares, but this light will guide you to who you're meant to be. Raise your head, pull your sleeves back up, and get up. This is only the beginning. Lean into me, rest your tired mind, and I will hold your heart with grace. To know how much love you deserve, I will fight for it. Take this blood of mine and paint your dreams to life. Once again, there's a reliance on cliches and imagery that we've seen before. It's not really doing anything new, you know? Heartbreak, stiff arms. Our greatest creation arrives in the wake of destruction. It kind of feels like every single line is a cliche, as harsh as that is to say, you know? The message here is also similar to poems we've already seen. You're sad, heartbroken, but pain will help you grow. Keep going. I'll support you too. It's simple. It's not the message that there's a problem with. The problem, again, is with the execution. It's that it's not doing anything new or creative or interesting with this idea, with this concept. I feel like there's some parts of this poem which could be good if they were developed further. As cliched as it is, I do enjoy the personification of heartbreak, it having arms which was stiff, now gentle. As you work through your grief and come to accept it and start to heal again, I think that's something that could be really interesting, and if it was developed more, that would be really damn cool. But again, it's just not enough, and it's not original, it's not really interesting. I just want more. This again feels like notes for a first draft, not a finished poem. Once again, we've got the criticisms of having some clunky syntax, and it all just sounds a bit generic, doesn't it? It's all very vague, nothing's very specific, nothing's really like making you feel these emotions. It's a lot of telling, not showing. This is the thing, a lot of the poems in this collection are just very forgettable. Nothing's really stuck with me. I haven't found myself in the time I've been making this video, or like since I first read the collection, or the number of times I've read it now. Nothing's really like stuck in my mind where I find myself sitting and just like having a ponder about what was said. Like, I don't think about them once the book is closed or when I'm not working on this video, because it's just not very memorable. There's not really much to it, you know? Just to move on quickly, I know that was very brief on that one, but we're going to move on to one called Musings of the Christmas Past. There's also Musings of the Christmas Present and future poems, but this one I just want to talk about briefly because it does something a little odd / maybe interesting, but I'm not personally a fan of it. I get why people might like it, but it's not for me. I will just say as a little warning here, this poem does talk about sexual assault, so I'm not going to read the whole thing out to you in case, you know, it's not good for some people. But what I will say is that as a whole, this is actually one of the better poems in the book. There are a few lines in this that show real damn potential, and I think, again, with a lot of reworking, there's something here. It's still clunky. As it stands, it's still underdeveloped, and it does need more editing, but there is some really powerful imagery in here on like a few of the lines, like the lingering licks of sweet potato pie lay underneath the taste of his mouth. That's damn good. That's fantastic. I love that. It's horrifying, and that juxtaposition really makes you feel so uncomfortable. Something which should bring you joy and sweetness and happiness is just so dark and brings back these bad memories, and now kind of disgust you. I think that's a really damn good image. That's so strong. It's just these little lines are let down by the rest of the poem, which just isn't as good. Again, I'd like to see this pushed further with more uncomfortable juxtapositions, with more uncomfortable imagery. Don't be afraid to make it dark. Yeah, I just want a bit more, that's all. What I don't like, however, there are random quotes stuck in the middle of stanzas. Like, they'll be like, stanza, 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 blah, blah. I stumble across his favourite quote. I am naturally warlike, attacking is one of my instincts. Nietzsche. Now, I know everyone says Nietzsche's name differently, so if I say it in a different way to you, I'm sorry. I understand what he was trying to do with this poem, but once again, I just find the execution is lacking. I'd have preferred an integrated allusion rather than just a direct quote in the middle of the text. Like, if it had been integrated like into his lines with something like, you know, maybe call the abuser, because that's what he is, call him a wannabe Nietzsche. Say about how something like his witterings about war rattle around your memory or something like that. Like, so allude to the quote, allude to what was said. You don't necessarily need to quote it directly. Like, I don't just want to hear a Nietzsche quote. Like, that's not really enough. That's not really interesting. What I want to hear is how it relates to you, how you as the poet remember it, how it makes you feel, what you think it says about him. Therefore, paraphrasing can be a really good way of doing that. Alluding can be a really good way of doing that. Just directly quoting in the poem, I mean, there's a time and a place for it, but I just don't quite think it worked here. It just falls a bit flat, you know? And I had the same feelings about the quote at the end too. It just sort of lets down this poem, which, like I say, has some promise and has some really good lines in it. It just sort of lets it down to just be like, and I'm going to end this by just quoting someone else's words because I don't feel confident to write my own, you know? You can, and I'm going to keep saying this, 100% allude to these quotes in the poem and reference them, or maybe like integrate the lines somehow if you want. Perhaps similar to how Karina Kopp integrates lines of John Donne's poem The Good Morrow in her poem Sonnet 59. That's a really good way of like integrating lines and quotes, but making them your own and kind of putting your own spin on it and making them feel part of the poem rather than just like quotes shoehorned in there, like the way Milo does it. to end a poem like this by just shoving in a quote by someone else, it just falls so flat for me, especially after the rest of the poem showed so much promise in certain areas. Not just the Karina Cott poem though, as a direct comparison, I want to bring in Cassandra Myers, who wrote a poem called Medusa Calls the Rape Crisis Line, which is fantastic. And again, a little bit dark, so I won't read it out here, but I'll pop the text on screen, and if you want to read it for yourself, I really, really recommend it, because it's absolutely fantastic. This is filled with allusions from how it's formatted to look like a labyrinth, made from this never-ending ringing of the phone, to her lines referencing a number of myths. So, for example, you have, "You wouldn't believe the labyrinth of services it took to get me here. Every handprint blooms a new head," obviously referencing Hydra. And of course, "I beg to be granite," which in my mind is a reference to both Pygmalion and Medusa. And there's plenty more in there. It's a really damn good poem, filled with allusions. And she brings in these references so you understand the meaning from these references, but she doesn't just directly quote something, which again would kind of fall flat, because she's bringing in her interpretations on it, her spin on it. She's giving what these quotes and allusions and references and characters mean to her, not just, this isn't an academic essay. I don't just want to hear a quote from someone. I want to know how it makes you feel. I want to know how you relate to it, how you remember it. And if you misquote it a bit, that's fine, because that's how you remember it. I want to hear your side of it. I want to hear your voice and your words, not someone else's, Cassandra Myers' poem there, it's absolutely packed with allusions. It's damn powerful, it's emotive, it's an incredible piece, and I think looking at pieces like that, Milo could learn a lot from her. And I think that's the thing with Milo. I just want to see some evidence of him having really studied and understood some of these fantastic works of poetry and incorporating what he's learned into his work rather than just blindly copying lines from others, I want to see understanding, not just mimicry. The very final poem that we're going to look at is another prose poem, and this is called Storytelling, and it's interesting. And this is one that I think ties into telling us about his creative process, his writing process, how he views his own work, and with what we know about his issues with Age of Scorpius, I think it's quite revealing. So let me read this one to you. "Let me bend time now, blur the lines between sentences. I write to silence chronology and all its dead. Existing between bliss and agony, I am drawn to abstraction. To be as we are, that is our humanity, that is our neutrality. Let connection flourish, let it be dampened with ink and paint and tears. Let us wield the pain that follows, give in and lean into. My spirit incarnates each ghost I summon, a chromatic aberration wayward to consistency. To paint with my heart is to learn my compatible mediums, running pieces of me to repair them. This is how I create. I'm not sure myself what it is, should be, couldn't be. I breathe the comfort and serenity of it all. We are creation, creation is art. How beautiful it is to share such intensity and passion, to find imagination and hope and emotion. The human experience is ours to share between us and the world. We are just two liminally addicted artists creating chapters of purpose in one larger novel." So, before I talk about this specifically, let's talk about Age of Scorpius. If you know anything about Milo and their TikTok videos and the first novel they published, you'll know it was a bit of a mess and people were not happy. I will say for Milo, he's very good at marketing, He bragged about something like getting $100,000 worth of pre-orders on this novel, which sadly he couldn't really deliver on. Some people didn't even get their books. The people who did were disappointed with it. It was like a whole drama. But his marketing was good. He knew how to get people excited and interested in the book, the world, the characters, the art, the everything. He can market. However, he also refused to get any decent editors or beta readers or actually listen to them, and his writing and editing process was really, really odd, because apparently instead of just editing his text, he would just rewrite his entire book from scratch every time, which was kind of like busy work, where he created like these 21st drafts instead of one edited and polished piece of work, which is why it was so full of typos and inconsistencies and plot holes and repetition and all this mad stuff. Like I say, as a result, the novel was not well received by people who were saying that it was full of typos, poor syntax, purple prose, and when all this was pointed out, Milo got quite defensive about it all. Although he's now apparently putting out a second version soon. He references it in the author's note of this book, saying it's coming soon, or somewhere in the book. I think, is it his about section? Hang on, let me double check for you. Yeah, it's the little about section, which ends with, "We're still working on the second edition of The Age of Scorpius, don't worry." So it's referencing here. He's still not put it out yet. Apparently he's released the first chapter on Patreon, and it's better, but I don't know. I've not read it. can't judge. But anyway, the point is I feel like this poem of his storytelling tells us a lot about why he had so many issues with that book. Because this poem romanticizes the act of writing and creating without understanding that it's also a craft that you need to work on and actually put real time and effort into. Milo acts like all you need to be a good writer is to have some feelings and throw something together and for it to have meaning to you, and then that'll automatically bring people together. But he fails to understand that creation takes time and effort and skill, and it doesn't just come together overnight. It's not just a matter of putting in a lot of hours, it's about making those hours count. It's not just about writing a lot of words, it's about making sure that what you write is high quality and putting in the time and effort to edit and get feedback and edit and get feedback and improve. More than this, though, this poem is literally full of all the things that the novel was criticised for, namely the overly flowery writing style, saying a lot without any substance, and being utterly pretentious. I think a lot of people like Milo romanticise being an author or a poet, and they want the label, but they don't really understand the years of study and hard work that other successful poets have done to get where they are today. Like, I'm only an amateur myself, and yet I know I have hundreds of drafts of poems and short stories and all sorts that I've thrown out because they weren't good enough. Each poem that I published in my books has already gone through countless drafts, like again and again and again and again. And for me, part of that writing process is going out and performing them at open mics and seeing how people relate to them, and then coming home and making changes and writing and trying to make them better based on the feedback I get. And more than that, I spent hundreds of hours reading God knows how many poems by other people, probably thousands at this point, and picking them apart and saying, well, I like this, I don't like this, what were they doing here, what's the technique used here, what was the meaning here? If I want to say this, then maybe I need to look at other poems who do this, this, and this, so I can find out what works and what doesn't work and so on. And I'm just an average amateur writer. I'm not a professional. I'm not, like, good at it. So I feel like Milo hasn't even done that, but he still wants to be a professional writer and a professional poet in people's eyes. Like I say, in his author's note for this book, Milo says, "This collection began when I was a senior in high school, eventually growing to become a 40,000 word project, pared down to the contents of this book," which sounds like he has done a lot of editing. However, I'm failing to see evidence of this in the text itself. Again, it still just seems like a lot more editing is needed. And it's, again, a quantity over quality thing. He seems to think because he's written a lot, there must be something good in there. But it's not just about writing a lot, it's about what you write and how you write. So I guess with all this in mind, while the review is for the readers, not the author, if I was going to give any advice to Milo or other poets out there, but to Milo specifically, I think what I would say is to take a break from writing for a while and go back to reading and studying and listening and learning. And then when it comes to writing again, maybe stop just trying to rewrite the stuff you wrote at 18. Do not be afraid to kill your darlings. He seems to keep holding on to, like, well, I started this when I was 14. I started this when I was 18. It's like, okay, cool. And you were a child back then. You probably had some juvenile ideas. It's okay to let it go and come up with new ones. Focus on the quality of your writing over the quantity of your writing. You don't need to write 40,000 words and whittle it down. You just need to make sure that what you're writing is good, and then you get feedback, and then you edit, and you get feedback, and you edit. It's not the quantity, it's the quality. I'm going to keep saying it. Don't be afraid to be harsh with yourself. Give yourself some distance between the writing and the editing process so you can come back to it and be more objective. Stop trying to think about the image of being a writer and start to actually think about the act of how to be a writer. After writing the script, I decided to go back and read some of the reviews on Goodreads, which I think I mentioned at the start of this video because I mentioned one of the reviews. So I thought it would be an interesting idea to just take a look at a few of them. Because I was a little bit worried that the people were just giving this book bad reviews because they already didn't like Milo because of the Age of Scorpius thing. But I don't think that's true. I genuinely think people have real criticisms. So this person said 2 stars. While it wasn't the worst poetry I've ever read, it wasn't great. Still very angsty with little depth. Definitely more than Age of Scorpius. I also find myself confused by the point of many of the poems. I read them over and over but couldn't make head nor tail of them. One aspect I liked was the ecological themes. Prather clearly loves the natural environment. That's something that I mostly agree with. Although I think he could have gone way heavier on the nature themes. Just saying. Another review said 3 stars, or rather 2.5 stars. There were positives and negatives. The positives did not outweigh the negatives. It's very clear that the author hasn't learned at all from the feedback given on his debut novel, and it shows through his essay and this piece. I don't have a lot of high hopes on the upcoming second edition of his debut. Never take a second chance to make a first impression. This felt like a collection of perfectly serviceable first drafts. It's a collection of ideas for poetry that need a lot of work and editing of a standard I'd expect for a high school homework submission. The thing with poetry is that vibes aren't enough. It requires careful thought and curated word choice. Words need to hit with surgical precision, which is something severely lacking in this collection. It's overwritten, unedited, lots of errors in grammar and style, and there are a lot of words that Prather simply doesn't seem to understand the meaning of or how they should be used. The whole collection feels like someone writing poetry who assumes that because it's highbrow, it requires big words, so dug out the thesaurus without really thinking about how language works contextually. And I completely agree with that. I think they put it better than I did in the rest of this video. But yeah, they're just my thoughts. As always, I can kind of be objective and be like, in some ways, and be like, well, objectively, this is a metaphor. Objectively, this is personification. Objectively, this is a lack of rhyme scheme and so on. But everything else about whether it's good or bad is just my subjective opinion. And if you like these poems, if you like the collection, that's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not going to tell you you shouldn't enjoy something or you shouldn't get something out of it. I do think there are topics covered in this book that are worth talking about, worth writing about, worth sharing, absolutely. And I think there is potential here. It just needs more work. It just needs more editing. It just needs more time, effort, and conscious thought put into it. But with that, I'm going to end this here. Thank you so much for watching today. Sorry if this end bit's been a little bit rushed. Kyra's really, really anxious over in the other bedroom. So I'm going to go see how she's doing, bless her. Her medication is still making her very, very irritable. I'm thinking of speaking to a vet and seeing if she can do anything to help, because I don't like seeing my baby all anxious. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. If you've read any of the poems or the collection, or if you've read Age of Scorpius, let me know what you think. And if you'd like me to read and review Age of Scorpius at some point, if I'm not too late, please let me know about that as well. But for now, yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here and sharing your time with me. I do appreciate it. And yeah, I will see you guys again very soon.